Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight, and I've been with RICS for nearly 14 years now. I currently work within the thought leadership part of the knowledge and practice area of the organisation, and my role is to look at the effect of AI, data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 qualified members working worldwide, right across that whole land and property life cycle, from land use, planning, development, construction, valuation, brokerage, building operations, property management, asset management, finance. It's a very, very broad canvas upon which AI, data and tech is having a profound effect. And indeed, our members also work across all the major asset types, so land itself, residential, commercial, alternative and infrastructure. So once again, a very, very wide canvas that AI and data and tech is bringing some great value to the sector. And I'm really pleased to have Paul Wilson join me today from Provelio. So welcome, Paul.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Now, as ever, before we get to the bits and bytes and the kind of data and tech side, it's always nice to get a bit of a kind of a personal piece in. So it'd be great to hear a brief sort of summary of your backstory and the origin story of Provelio.
Yeah, thanks. So started off as a chartered quantity surveyor. After about 5 years or so, specialised in project management. 2002 set up Provelio with a view really just to do project management properly. And from there, we have grown the practice into a practice that really looks at the management and digitisation of large asset owning estates. So, large property retain portfolios, and helping clients get the best and the maximum out of them, really.
Thanks. And I guess I'd almost like to probe a bit more on that second statement, because in my introduction, I talked about this kind of broad canvas that our members work in. And I guess it'd be nice to hear a bit more detail about the kind of environment you're working in with, because clearly it's data analytics, it's digital tools in real estate, but you're obviously working in a particular kind of sector, a particular kind of, set of people, a set of stakeholders. So give us a bit more flavour of that, if you would, Paul.
Yeah, so typically we would be working with clients who have a retained estate of some sort. It might be a retail park, it might be a shopping centre, it might be a university, a hospital, it could be a local authority. So it's across any sector where there is generally a team called the estates team or the property team or the asset management team, whose job is to keep the lights on and keep things working and to cope with new buildings and projects as they come online, deliver them, and then maintain them and take them through their whole life.
Indeed, and once again, you mentioned that concept of a kind of an estates team. I mean, I'd be interested, when we think about kind of digitising the built environment, it's clearly not just an IT issue. It's a property issue. Yes, it is an IT issue. I mean, what kind of stakeholders do you get involved in within an organisation that you're working with, in addition to that estates team? Because it is more than just an IT issue. It's more than just a property and asset management issue, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think generally our sort of working premise is the estate or asset base generally is the second biggest cost after salaries. So it's normally the thing that enables the rest of the organisation to work and function. And the phrase we always use is, or the glue that holds everything together is your built environment. And so we work with those estates teams, but and that's normally capital projects, the carbon team, the maintenance, compliance, space utilisation, leasing, whatever it is. But then to get that team effectively working at enterprise level, you have to work with the COO, the CFO. We work very, very closely with finance teams, the technology team. There's normally a sort of there's always an interface there, and really it's sort of all of the functions of an enterprise that the estate touches, and frankly, it touches them all. There aren't many occasions where we don't have to talk to whether it might be the end users or tenants, or it could be could be sort of the technical people who are running the buildings, or we sat down with the finance team trying to understand where the money's going and follow the money, as they say.
Yeah. And given you such got such a sort of wide range of stakeholders there. Is it a challenge, or what are the challenges around demonstrating the value of this technology? Because clearly, as you know, real estate is seen as a cost in many ways. It wants to be optimized. People want to understand they're getting the maximum value from it. What are the challenges, if any, or the opportunities to demonstrate value of digitizing in the way you're doing?
Yeah, I have to say, as a rule, we don't find many obstacles or challenges to it. You have the general typical issues, rightly so, around GDPR and protection of data, and that generally is a technical conversation with the IT team so that they know what you're doing with their data. And that, like I said, it is a technical conversation, and it's about finding a solution that works for each client. So that's sort of business as usual. I think with the finance teams, we generally find they are very grateful for someone to be lifting the lid on what they see as quite an opaque business function. I think estates is very often seen as this sort of dark art, and no one, unless you're an estates person, really understands it. And the ability we found to open that up and making the data transparent and factual and reliable actually goes a long way in terms of building hearts and minds. Because you're not. I think very often, with sort of, I found with decision making around property in the past, is a decision may have got made, and it's almost by well, we don't really know why we're doing it, but it seems to be the sensible feeling. And I think it's seen as this sort of relatively dumb asset class that just it'll be there for another 60 years. What more can we do? And when you start with the data to reveal what we think are all like the hidden gems of value within the estate or the assets, the finance people are always very quick to understand that. They immediately resonates with them. And then once you start working around being able to optioneer with it and scenario test and sensitivity test it in real time, it becomes almost like the thing that everybody centers around. And so rather than, so if you like, arguing between functions within an enterprise, actually, what we find is that becomes the thing that everybody's looking at and saying, hang on, we've got a purpose here and an objective, and we can see where we're going. And that, as a project manager, to me, that sort of 101 of project management is clear objective, and then that's what you build a team around.
I mean, you've kind of touched on kind of the almost the high level benefits there, and I guess one of the things that you brought out there, if I'm interpreting correctly, was almost that you've termed, I think as you used the word, I won't use it, a dumb asset. It's become a much smarter asset, a much more active asset. There's that sense that you said that they're very passive. It just sits there for X years, but from what you're describing, it gives the ability to treat it as a much more dynamic asset in terms of the decisions you can make.
Absolutely, and I think this is sort of the very much why we got into this, and the opportunity we saw with the digitisation of estates and property and assets generally, is that when it's seen as this sort of static, if you like, sort of built environment that's is like it is for a long period of time, and to change any of it takes many months, if not years, people sort of lose interest in it and just think, well, it's illiquid, just everything about it is difficult. But once you start showing that how you can increase the length of it, or the lifetime of it by certain interventions, or exposing where maybe it's not compliant, or it needs greater maintenance, and then you can relate those benefits to each other. So what we found, for example, is once you understand the space utilization of an asset, you can then start to understand how you could improve that, which then has an impact on the capital program, the backlog maintenance program, the trying to get to net zero. It sort of is a bit of a light bulb moment we found with the clients, where they suddenly look up and say, oh, Craig, so now we're solving multiple problems at once, plus we're also moving forward with our strategic objectives, as in, and we've noticed this a lot particularly in the recent years with sort of financial difficulties, a lot of these sort of organisations have faced is that they're they still want to maintain, or they may have legal obligations to maintain ESG, net zero. We've got to get the backlog maintenance down, and they're looking at all these things in separate functions and can't find a solution. But when you integrate them together, and then you can start to see how fixing one actually part solves two or three others, it becomes very powerful.
And given your experience of this, I mean, is it something quite binary that really, if you don't have this kind of data management, this more structured, formal data management, and indeed then the kind of analytical solutions that you can build on that, is it effectively just not possible to do some of the things that you've now talked about? Is it simply as binary as that unless you use digital technology, some of these problems are almost insurmountable?
Yeah, well, yeah. The short answer is it's absolutely binary. If you haven't got that in as a foundational piece, we're doing some work at the moment on a digitisation roadmap in terms of how to digitise your estate, and I think there's been a tendency with things like Smart Campus, BIM, these sorts of initiatives where some people have gone and bought shiny and just bought an isolated bit of kit or something that looks good and ticks a box, and then it gets lost, and the benefits and all the value of those initiatives, because they're all valuable, is just about doing them in the right order. So for us, what we always advocate with clients is get on top of your internal data first, because you've got a very data rich environment, and you tend to be management information poor. And when you can convert that data into management information, you can then start to make great strategic decisions. So you're doing the right things in the right order and spending the right money on it. And that naturally then paves the way to get to your smart campus, or your what's the right point for you to be introducing BIM on which projects. When do you map your existing estate? And those sorts of they're really big, expensive questions, but over time, that I think for all estates, it will just be the norm. And I remember going to a conference a number of years ago, and somebody was asking about the business case for digitisation, and it was an aircraft engineer who was sort of responded and just said, I can't believe that's a question. How you wouldn't dream of building an airplane without digital and 3D and modelling and clash detection and all smart systems, but for some reason construction you think you can, and would need convincing to not do it digitally.
I suppose I'm mindful that when I asked you initially about your sort of backstory, that to some extent Provelio has been on a similar journey to your clients. I mean, what led Provelio to move into this space? What was the kind of light bulb moment, or was it just a series of smaller little light bulb moments that sort of changed the direction of travel of your business and the kind of services you now offer?
Yes, yeah, interesting question. I think there's probably two things stick in my mind. Is I can remember going to Bristol Poly in it was in late 80s,
Yeah.
and we did a lecture on structured data analysis. And at the time, it was in relation to bills of quantities, and it always stuck with me as the one of the lectures that I still remember. And and that sort of systemic thinking around data and how one builds on the other, that builds on the other, gives you a sort of get right down to a lowest possible level up to the biggest possible. And then about 7 years ago, we got approached to go and do some project management work for the MOD, and we actually got asked to project manage the data analysts, because what they were finding was they had some very clever people doing some very clever stuff, but they weren't staying on objective, the data, and then they go off on a tangent and another tangent. But what we built there really showed me that, and this was in the days of probably Excel and databases. So and we we did that work for a number of years, and some quite influential work. But what we then realised when we sort of came out and reflected, and we said we don't want to lose this skill. We've built up a real, because by then actually the analysts came and worked for us, and we started, and we realised that we could apply the same logic, so whether it be rifles and tanks, we could apply the same logic to property, and we could talk about boilers and roofs. And conceptually it just flipped straight into it. It was the almost effortless translation conceptually across. And then it was just about how could we do that smartly, and then that's coincided with the rate at which technology has moved on, and what you can now do with just a standard Microsoft sort of suite of products. And I think the future does look rosy. Even the introduction of AI already starting to build that into it, and the potential is there, and where it's such a data-rich environment, and I think where it's been so slow to digitize historically construction and property, we think there's a massive opportunity to do some really, really good work, proper value work, which is always nice.
Indeed. I'm going to pick up on that phrase you used of data rich, and I guess the flip side of that can be that you might move into a new client, a new large estate, and you've probably got, when I say too much data, you've probably certainly got data in too many different formats, in different systems, in different silos. Some of the data may not actually be relevant for making management decisions. What have been the challenges about facing that kind of almost overload of too many different kinds of data formats and incompatible systems and systems that don't talk to each other? Because quite often estates grow by kind of accretion, don't they? They don't start off with a nice clean sort of green field with all the assets with the same systems on. So I guess you must have bumped into some quite challenging situations about trying to kind of aggregate those data sets.
Yeah, and it is a challenge, but the work we did originally at the MOD, what we realized was it's still just data. It doesn't matter what the software system is. Ultimately, it generates a data set. And so when we built our tool, what we were saying was this has to be software agnostic. It doesn't matter, because there always will be a different CAFM system or a different project system, or any number of tools that a client might need. And we didn't want to become this only works if you've got this and this, because that would then limit the opportunity. So actually we sort of embraced the fact that it was all different, and actually we were far more concerned about data quality and provenance. So we work with some clients who run their estate off a spreadsheet, but they run it very, very well off a spreadsheet. And if that is well maintained, good quality data, then I would rather work with that than a poorly maintained CAFM system, for example. But then that leads you to the next sort of challenge, which is then if you have got an average data set, what can you do? And then what we've then found is when you sort of look at the data across the estate, you're able to sort of, we grade it in essence, sort of standard, data readiness grading. And what we're able to do is to model the gaps, so we can backfill where there are gaps. And there's again, part of the data rich environment, there is an awful lot of data available where you can say, we know what you would typically be expected to spend if you were an NHS trust of this type or size, or a university, or a retail or whatever. And as a result, you can backfill any gaps they have got. And as part of the exercise, what you're then doing is setting out a plan for future data improvement. So it gets over this obstacle. People say, well, don't really want you looking at our data, we don't think it's very good. So it doesn't really matter whether it's good or not. Let's just be clear where we're starting from. And we've built backlog maintenance models off of condition surveys that are 6 or 7 years out of date. But actually, it might say, the problem is 80 million. Now, all right, the problem might be 78, it might be 82. But when you're looking at a strategic model decision, that is good enough to be able to say over the next 10 years, we need about 80 million to solve this problem.
So, Paul, I mean, a lot of what you've talked about, I think, has really made the case very strongly that you can't really improve your decision making without this kind of data-driven analytical approach. I mean, I guess I'm sure what our listeners and viewers would love to hear is some real sort of tangible examples of where you've seen decisions that have been made, operational improvements across any of the estates that you work with that really bring to life what people can tangibly do with this. And you've talked about turning data into management information. And once they have that information, what sort of things are people actually doing now on a very tangible basis?
So I think what we're finding is once you've got data, you can use it for any management decision across your estate or portfolio, because all you need to do is to go and reach for a data source relative to that subject. So if you want to talk about, I don't know, the extent of conservation, buildings you've got, or where we're at on our carbon, reduction program, or where we're on our high risk buildings program. Ultimately, it's data sets that you can pull in, and they are there. And this is sort of our sort of case, really. Is this information is there. Now and certainly with the use of APIs and things like that, you can go and find it, even if it's wobbly, all that kind of stuff. But what we've then found is when you get into the sort of the strategic stuff, we're doing works around estates rationalisation, where sectors, HE at the moment have got a massive financial crisis, and when the vice chancellor says I need to reduce the estate by 20%, well, what does easily said, and people go away and think, well, I have no idea where to start, and the truth is you've got to break it down into bite-sized chunks. We've used it for mergers, so if mergers, acquisitions, due diligence, value for money studies, if you want to redo your estate strategy, property strategy, where you're going with it, and I think any and all those sort of high level things you'd want to do. But once you've done the high level, it allows you, the way we've built our system is it allows you to drill down to the very lowest, going back to what I was saying about structured data and analytics. And I can always remember when we worked in the MOD, is they wanted to know the cost of deployment and the cost of a rifle. And it was it always stuck in my head as a really interesting, and it's very much like so trained as a quantity surveyor. It was that I want to know the cost of a building, and I want to know the cost of a metre squared of paint.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of logic. So what we have tended to find with the clients we've done this for is the more you can answer, the more they ask.
Yeah.
And because you started to answer some of their long held frustrations of this opaque black box called estates, it does free up their mind then to say, so now we can think a little bit more radically about the estate. What if we do this and what if we do that? And so the scenario testing that comes out of that, and well, what if we do a bit more of this, so I think if it's a university, you say, well, what if we want to expand and do 10 more of this type of course and shrink these? What does that look like? And we're with a client recently, and she came out with a phrase right at the start of the meeting as a COO there, the CFO, and the director of estates, and she said, I don't know if I've got the right size estate for what you want to do with this as a business. And it's a really interesting sort of perspective, because what it's saying is we can either work together with the estate we've got, or we work together and you tell me how you want me to shape it in the future.
Yeah, no, I
and that's really, I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. Well, I guess my last question, I suppose, if I put on a kind of virtual CFO hat here, I suppose, as ever, we've talked about the kind of financial imperatives of estate management, and indeed, obviously, there will be initial costs of putting any kind of new systems in. I mean, typically, how long can a client begin to see some actual results? How can they, how long will it be before they can start making some better decisions when they sort of take this approach that you use?
Yeah, so when we built it, my direction to our team was, I don't want to get into a prolonged conversation with a client that says, I've now got to go through IT procurement. This is going to, this is going to take me an age. And nor when I do buy it, do I want to wait 12 months for a big moment, that suddenly this great big reveal. Because my experience of big reveals is they rarely fail to disappoint. So our view is we built this that you can have meaningful data in probably insight, what we call initial insights, within 8 weeks. So we normally do it in terms of within 1 to 2 weeks, you get your data readiness assessment, so you know what state your data's in. Within another 6 weeks of that, you've got some initial insights from that data to say, did you know this? Did you know that? And then another 4 weeks on from that, you've got a fully functioning data decision. So 3 months from sort of flash to bang is our view of, and we know we've done it, and we and what we commit to doing. And to me, that feels about right as a timescale, and that people would recognise, most clients would recognise they can't have it overnight. But I think much longer than 3 months, I think people forget why we still waiting on that, like when's this really going to happen? And I think, to me, that's some of my worry, and it's why we did the built the digitisation roadmap, is so that clients could understand where they're at on the journey of digitisation, and at least if they're on the right path in the right direction, they may not get there as quick as they like. Some of them may get there sooner, but even if they know they've taken the first 2 or 3 main steps, and that has given them a visible set of management information that they can make decent decisions on, then they can then progressively move into the more complex, real high value, some of the digital stuff that's out there, the smart campus, all that sort of thinking. But they'll be able to take those steps confidently, and when they do, they'll know it's the right one.
Yeah, as you say, I think unfortunately that the world is littered with huge projects that have, as you said, never failed to disappoint. And I think that kind of iterative approach, that journey where you can see some returns, you can see some value relatively quickly, I think is a much better way to get engagement. Well, Paul, it's been fascinating, and it's such an important area more generally for the built environment to digitize in this kind of responsible and effective way. But for today, thanks ever so much for your time, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
Great, thanks for having me.